Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be talking about investing your life in our study of Ecclesiastes chapters 10 through 12. This is part of a continuing study of the Poetic books. The book of Ecclesiastes is organized around 5 sermons, the first in which tells Solomon's story. He speaks about how all of life is emptiness, but man ought to enjoy goodness because it's from God. And that introduces the next 4 themes. So we've seen these, each theme. The second theme is that I should say the first theme, introduced in the first sermon. There's a monotony to life, speaking of the seasons of life, and there's profit of seeing God as the giver of all the seasons of life. And then in chapters 4 and 5, there's an emptiness and wisdom as we enjoy the journey. And so we're reminded that instead of being fearful, that we ought to enjoy life while it lasts, because it is a gift of God. The fourth sermon, chapters 6 through 9, speak about how there's a futility in wealth, and it asks the question, what do you want in life? And man sees life as a struggle, but God gives life to be enjoyed. We finally come now to the fifth sermon, the final sermon, and here we are reminded of that theme that there's a certainty of death. And it speaks about investing your life before you die. Because of the emptiness of this life, because of the mysteriousness of this life, the enigma of this life, man ought to fear the Lord and follow his word. So let's dive in. Ecclesiastes chapter 10 and verse 1. What a way to start a sermon. Dead flies make a perfumer's oil stink. Can't even say it. So a little foolishness is weightier than wisdom and honor. A little foolishness goes a long way, just like dead flies in a valuable commodity. You buy this expensive perfume and you open it up and it's full of maggots and dead flies. Yeah, you say, well, there's only a few of them in there, but still, a little badness goes a long way. Verse 2, a wise man's heart directs him toward the right, but the foolish man's heart directs him toward the left. And of course, the question is, which way are you going to go? Verse 3, even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking, and he demonstrates to everyone that he's a fool. Again, that same continuing idea, a little foolishness goes a very long way. Verse 5, there is an evil I have seen under the sun, like an error which goes forth from the ruler. Folly is set in many exalted places, while rich men sit in humble places. Notice, we've been talking about, a little foolishness goes a long way, and yet there's things that can happen that overtake us through, can I say it this way? Through no fault of our own. Verse 7, I've seen slaves riding on horses, and princes walking like slaves in the land, and the preacher says, I've seen things happen that just aren't the way you think they ought to be. So that wise investments don't always pay off. Wisdom doesn't always pay off. Sometimes even if you're wise, bad things will happen. Consider the case of Job. Verse 8, likewise he who digs a pit may fall into it, and a serpent may bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones might be hurt by them, and he who splits logs might be endangered by them. You go to do a good thing, and bad things can come of it. And yet that doesn't say we shouldn't try things. Chapter 11, verses 1 and 2 speak about investments. Cast your bread on the surface of the waters. And when you spoke about the waters to a Hebrew listener, remember they came out of the desert. The Jewish people were a desert people. And so the waters were a very dangerous place, especially when you talk about going out into the ocean. Cast your bread on the surface of the water sounds like, man, I'm making a sort of a foolish investment, because that boat could sink, it could get lost, it could get overcome by pirates. And yet he says, cast your bread on the surface of the waters, for you will find it after many days. That investments very often do pay off. Verse 2, divide your portion to 7 or even to 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth. Again, chance happenings can happen that are bad, but if you diversify, and when folks are looking to invest in certain funds and things like that, they'll diversify their holdings. And that principle is seen here as well. In verse 6, sow your seed in the morning, and do not be idle in the evening, for you do not know whether morning or evening sowing will succeed. So try them both, whether both of them alike will be good. So again, diversify not just your holdings, but diversify your efforts. We have a saying, don't put your eggs all in one basket, because one of those baskets might drop. So if one drops, you still have the other one. Verse 9, rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood. Remember, we talked about enjoying the journey. That's a sort of a reflection of the same idea. And follow the impulses of your heart. Now, oftentimes we think, well, wait a minute, the heart is deceitful. I shouldn't be doing that. But here the writer says, follow the impulses of your heart and the desire of your eyes. And yet, no, don't forget that God will bring you to judgment for all these things. So don't be foolish about it. Don't be sinful about it. But that thing that God gave you, go do it. That idea that you want to do, don't look back on life with regret and saying, I wish I had done this. Go do that, because life is short. Verse 10, so remove grief and anger from your heart, and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. Grief, anger, there's just not enough hours in the day and days in your life to waste them on those sorts of things. And that's not saying never grief, but there's a time for that, but then there's a time to go past that. And yes, there's such a thing as righteous anger, but get past that. Go past the anger and enjoy that which God has given. We come to chapter 12, verse 1. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and the years draw near when you will say, I have no delight in it. While you're young, yes, enjoy life, but also enjoy God. Remember your Creator. Verse 2, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. That's all pictures of growing older. And he's going to take us now on a trip of growing older. Verse 3, in the day that the watchmen of the house tremble. And notice what we're describing is a house, or those accoutrements within a house. And it's a house that's getting old, but it's not just a house. The house is my human body. And so the watchmen of the house tremble. You ever notice that old people, they're not quite so steady as they used to be. They're beginning to tremble a little bit. And the mighty men stoop, and the pillars of your house, that is your body, you begin to sort of stoop over. And you see the posture of older people. And the grinding ones stand idle because they are few. And again, this is the house idea, but it's my body, and the grinding ones in my body, that's my teeth. They didn't have dentures back then, or bridge work, and so when you lost your teeth, that's all you had. And those who, I'm continuing, and those who look through windows grow dim. Now, I'm wearing glasses these days. I didn't used to wear them when I was younger, but now I do, because my eyesight isn't what it used to be. They didn't have glasses back then, and so the windows were your eyes, and they began to grow dim, and you couldn't see like you used to. And the doors on the street are shut as the sound of the grinding mill is low. We talked about the grinding mill, but also notice the sound of it is low. It's as if someone shut the doors. You can't hear like you used to hear. And yet, notice, and one will arise at the sound of the bird. Now, you would think if you can't hear, you'd sleep better. But that's not really the case. As you get older, very oftentimes it becomes more difficult for older people to sleep. Just the least little thing sort of wakes us up. And all the daughters of song will sing softly. And even then, those songs just get lower and lower and lower. I can't hear like I used to. Verse 5. Furthermore, men are afraid of a high place. I don't go to those. And back in my younger years, I was a firefighter. I used to go to some high places, rappelling off high-angled things. I don't do that anymore. Men are afraid of high place and the terrors on the road. And the almond tree blossoms. When the almond tree blossoms, the tree just suddenly grows white. As we get older, our hair begins to, if we keep it at all, it begins to get gray. The grasshopper drags himself along. You don't have quite the bounce that you used to have to your step. And next we read that the caperberry is ineffective. I guess we would say today that Viagra doesn't work any longer. Your sexual prowess has gone by the wayside. And then he goes on to say, for man goes to his eternal home, while mourners go about in the street. In other words, remember the Lord before the funeral comes. He goes on, verse 6, remember him, and that remember him is taken back from verse 1, before the silver cord is broken, and the golden bowl is crushed, the pitcher by the well is shattered, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. Those are all things that in a house things are breaking down, but it's describing before your life finally ends. And these are all images of your soul and spirit separating from your body, from life leaving this mortal body. Verse 7, then the dust will return to the earth as it was. Takes us back to the words of Genesis chapter 3. From dust you came, to dust you shall return. Verse 7, the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. And now we come to the conclusion, which is right where we began this whole book, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 8. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity. Remember, we described vanity, emptiness, as that vapor. And in one sense, it's so short. You breathe out and you see that little breath of vapor, and then life is gone. But also there's something mysterious and intangible about it that you can't grab a hold of it. You can't hold on to it. It's like trying to hold on to vapor. Chapter 12, verse 12, but beyond this, my son, be warned, the writing of many books is endless, and excessive devotion to books is worrying to the body. I find it interesting that he says this at the end of his book and not the beginning. The conclusion, verse 13, the conclusion when all has been heard, here it is, fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person, for God will bring every act to judgment. Now he's already said this earlier, so he's repeating it. There are some who have looked at this and thought, well, this must have been added by a later copyist, a later writer. No, I don't think so. Because he's only repeating what he said earlier in this sermon. God will bring about every act to judgment, whether everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. So be warned, enjoy life, realize its brevity, but realize that there's something after your life is done. There's a judgment that takes place after the fact. Now, he doesn't tell us what that looks like. We know from our New Testament perspective, there's a life after death. And we also know that even with this judgment, there's one who is judged on our behalf. And so that we can face that judgment in confidence through faith in him.